Hi, I'm Mark Unger, producer of Roundtable. Because we find this presentation so special, we really would like for you to see this. Please watch.
Hello and welcome to Single Shot. This program starts the series of conversations about photography. We're planning to reveal some mysteries of its past, future and present. And as the beginning of it, we wanted to start with the basis, the establish the ground. We have here in the studio a great photographer, a historian and theoretician of photography, Shaun. And we wanted to see what we can say about the general idea that rules the presence of photography in this world, and how it came to the point where it is now, and how it probably will develop in the future. Hi, Shaun.
Hello, Alex, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming to us. Shaun is a photographer with many years background. He's shooting with pretty huge cameras. We will probably ask him to tell a little bit more about what he's using later. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do photographically and why you do it? Basically, if I may ask you to start with telling me what was your first reason to basically pick up this huge box with a piece of glass in front of it and make this first shot.
Well, it all started when I was a teenager, around 18 or 19. And I was picking up disposable cameras, 35 millimeter disposable cameras. And when I dropped them off at the local drugstore and received the prints, I was mesmerized by it. It was like stopping time. So from there, in my early 20s, I started picking up Minotas, which was a rangefinder camera. Mm-hmm. Which is my first Minolta was a High-Matic, which I still use. And from there, it went from street photography to fashion to photojournalism, anything that draws me in.
So you're working in several areas of photography, from fashion to journalism, which is actually a pretty broad area.
Yes.
And artistically, I know that still your most favorite part of photography is creating this magic, creating art.
Yes.
Not just telling the story, but merging the story with aesthetics. Artistically, where does switch happen? Because I would imagine that disposable cameras was something that would just helping you to freeze the moment and preserve it to yourself. I mean, a lot of people start in this way. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're correct. The camera is very pragmatic. It's a very simple instrument compared to other mediums. If you look at the camera and you say something like a painter will have to learn muscle memory with the paintbrush, or a musician will have to learn how to hold an instrument. Oh. Basically, a camera is lifting it up and looking through the viewfinder, or just looking over the camera and aiming and timing. But it goes deeper than that. So I would have to say that my first understanding of it artistically would be that light will never land that way again. You will never see that moment again except photographically.
That's a very powerful way to put it. Light will never land this way again. And indeed, this whole universe is the constant game of light, which we can capture with these amazing devices, which first had a film that actually could capture the light, and now they have electronic equivalent of it. So I've seen recently a phrase of yours that was saying that digital photography is back. Besides being obvious, come back to film photography is back. You will hear everywhere around. I'm pretty sure that you have a little more to say about this statement.
Oh, well, digital photography is dead is a counterpunch for people that say film photography is dead. I don't like to hear that film photography is dead. Being that I work on film, of course I would have this kind of attitude towards anyone saying that. But in order to say that film is dead, you have to say digital is dead, because they follow each other. And we can't, you can't say, it's sort of like saying, jazz is dead and then not rock and roll is dead.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to measure them together. You can't, I know the consumerism and the commercialism want to say one is better than the other.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's much easier to out something and continue with what is more profitable.
Yes.
But frankly, when I've seen this phrase, I read it a little bit differently. Again,
how did you read it?
I read it as a statement that's saying that there is more life and more breathing of creativity associated to film.
Yes.
And that's how I understand your understanding of photography. That's why I've seen it this way. So you do believe that, actually?
Yes, that's a more profound reason and understanding of it. Of course, I think that film photography, which has only been around, if you talk about roll film, you would say about 128 years or 129 years. That's not a long time. Photography in general has been around for 190 years. Well, no, 192 years. And the term photography has been around for about 178 years. So that's not a long time when you talk about medium-wise. However, if you look at photography having a full century, it will be the 20th century. So the creativity is there. I think that with digital, at times it looks like they want to use film photography as inspiration, and then when they want to be popular, it pushes away from it. So it says, like, people will say, well, film is dead, and then all of a sudden you will see a famous photographer, they use digital promoting film, and then all of a sudden they're saying the process is slow or is this and it's that. But the creativity part of photography doesn't have anything to do with format. But if we're talking the brotherhood or the togetherness of photography, we should accept both of them. So if you're going to say one is dead, I'm going to say the other is dead, creative wise. If we're talking about popularity, if someone want to say no one is using film anymore, then I would have to say creatively no one is doing creative digital photography. Of course, there are some out there, but
absolutely,
it's more to it than that.
For me, it was very special phrase because I definitely was understanding where you're coming from, but I myself actually is focusing on digital photography, and film for me is basically more of, I feel about the film more like a person feels about his parents.
Yes.
I do know that I came from that. I do know that this is the basis on which everything I do is rooted. But for me, it's still terra incognita. So knowing that you're so intimately familiar with it and working so profoundly with it, for me it was very interesting to see, besides everything else, why you selected to stay with film when in many ways it's so much easier and so much more appropriate and commercial way to come with a digital camera. It just makes your life easier, but you still stay with film. There gotta be some deep and profound reason.
Well, it's the experience. And starting off, I'm 39 now, so I have 20 years of handling film. My loyalty is to film. If I would try to learn digital, I would be like 50 years old before I catch on, or 60 years old. At least that's what I would think. So it's more of, I don't want to consider myself a traditionalist, because photography is not that old to have traditional values per se, because you would have to look at it like, well, what would digital be? If photography is traditional, then digital would be what, an infant? So if we look at how we study photography today, you have to balance both out. I'm just a photographer in general, but if someone come at film photography and they don't want to learn it, it offends me. Because I don't think everyone should have a film camera per se, but I think that you should know the history of it. You should know where the first photograph came from, or even a film photographer, because they are here. I mean, film is not ancient. I mean, people treat it as if, it's an archaeological site. You have to find, old film reels or something. But no, they still produce film, and it's still here. I process film every day. I use film every day.
They actually restarted Polaroid cassettes production.
Yes, that's a great thing. And also, film photography opened up jobs for other people, the manufacturing plants and the shipping and the shops that sell the film. So I mean, I don't want to see anything dead because you talk about a business economy, so forth and so on.
Oh, absolutely not. Well, so as I understand, you never even looked seriously in direction of digital photography. You just focused on film and never even made attempts to give it a try.
No,
Oh,
I will
then-
retire if they stop making film. And I appreciate. I'm an advocate of photography, so I love digital photographers' work. So it's not like I just turn my head. I know there's a stereotype about film photographers that be like they don't look at digital. I love digital work.
I definitely know that you're not the kind of purist who
Yeah.
just bashing other approaches to the media. But I actually have something very interesting for you to elaborate on. Digital photography is instrumentally different from film photography in one peculiar thing. In digital photography, it's absolutely absolute no-no to overexpose. In film photography, as I know, it's better to overexpose than to underexpose.
Yes.
Do you see anything interesting philosophically about this difference?
Well, I think it's the measurement of light. You're talking about chemicals.
Mhm.
So chemicals have a reaction.
Basically, can correct it in development if you overexpose the film.
Yeah, they call it pushing and pulling. You push film and you pull film, which means if you push film, you would, if I take a 400 speed of film, which would be on a digital camera, you see the speed, you see 100, 200, 400, 800. If I wanted to take 400, I could push it up 2 stops, which would be 800 speed of film. So yes, you can overexpose, but that's with negative film. You're not supposed to do that with slide film, which Kodak is making a comeback with the chrome line.
Oh, they're coming back with that as well.
Yes.
So talk about resurrections.
Yes, it's not dead. I mean,
No, not at all.
Film is dead, and I'm either angel or saint because I'm still here. So
Let me take it one step further. So film photography, digital photography. And right now, besides existence of digital photography, which basically is a different mean of creating the image from what lens produces. Basically, this guy would have a film in it, and digital camera would have a sensor instead.
yes,
Instrumentally, it's still the same process. But what is different in digital in many ways is the opportunities and tools that you can use to manipulate the photograph afterwards. I know that you know ins and outs of the film development, and
Yes.
you can talk for hours about techniques of doing it. I actually seen the videos; they're actually
Yes.
quite great.
thank you.
And but for digital photography, the amount of what you can do with the camera is probably equal to what you can do after you actually created the shot. I personally look at my work as just raw ingredients for the final product. I basically take the image and then create something in many ways completely different, and in some ways completely unrecognizable. What do you think is it fit in the understanding of photography? I mean, in classic approach, which you represent and which you firmly believe in, one of the most instrumental parts of it is ability to say it came from the camera like this,
Yes,
and ability to actually say this is how it happened. So basically, in my personal view, the photography, especially classical refined film photography, is talking about the truth. It's realism. It's even in when you use it in form of art, it's reporting. But
Yes.
My view of the digital photography, it actually have a capacity of creative fiction. To create a dream, create something that never existed.
well, I have a question for you. With you stating that, what about the outcome and the output of digital photography? Because you have to realize we started photography in the 19th century. That was 70 plus years of photographs. Now you add that with the 20th century, which will be 100 years of photographs. Do you know that we have taken more photographs in this 21st century than the entire time photography has been invented? What do you think about that? Do you think that with digital, can you overdose on it?
I definitely do believe there is an overdoing in it, and sometimes when I'm looking at the way people holding camera on the street, I'm actually wondering if we should have an exam and license to be a photographer. Yeah, I totally understand what you're talking about. We are overwhelmed with the amount of products digital cameras bringing into the world, and a lot of good work actually just getting drawn in it. With film photography, it wasn't exactly like this. There was still myriads of people with cameras, but just not as much. And it was taking a lot more skill to actually master the photography before you can actually master art of photography.
Yes, there was a process to it.
As we actually spoke before the beginning of the show, I wish it made on the film, but it's actually a very interesting idea. Before you can create, you need to know where it came from. That's indeed true to every art, but photography is peculiar because you do need to learn plethora of things before you can actually make a correct picture on film, and you can't go back. With digital, there is much more room for correction and much bigger roles.
Yes. Well, what do you think the artistic part of digital photography is about? Because I know with film photography, when we speak of art and film photography, it's usually outside of commercialism, which means that you don't have an editor. When you do fashion photography, you have to go through a channel of people in order to be approved. You have to go through an editor, an art director, makeup artist, hairstylist, and a whole team of people. You also have to wait, because it could be the photograph for the magazine or the newspaper is not really your photograph per se, depending on what kind of contract you have with the publication. With digital, what do you think the artistic boundaries are? Do you think that if you're great at Photoshop, does that make you a great photographer? Or if you're great at shooting raw images, does that make you a great photographer, artistically wise?
That's exactly what I was talking about. My personal approach as a photographer is creating a dream instead of creating reality.
Okay.
I do photograph for a while, and I still post on the Facebook sometimes just unrefined shot, which just looks just the way I want it as it is. And it is, for me, equivalent of having a diary.
Okay.
But what I create artistically is an image that never existed in this world. What existed is a fake idea of this image, which I basically pulled out of it, changed, and presented to the world as partly being reality and partly being what is me, actually.
Okay.
So that's what I was actually trying to elaborate on. Does it actually fit in the concept of development of photography, or it's something new and something completely different coming up? What do you think?
Well, I think that they're different. I think that they don't have to. I don't think that digital and film have to war against each other in order to define its meaning.
I wasn't talking about war in any way. I was just wondering, and I actually truly wondering about it for myself as well. And I'm pretty sure there are a lot of other people. Do we have actually a progression going on right now, or something completely different being emerged? I mean, everything is progression, no matter how you spin it. But there is a progression from, say, Renaissance painting to 19th century realism.
Yes.
And there is a huge gap between 19th century realism, true expressionism, and impressionism into modern art of, say, Warholian style.
Yes.
It's still a progression, but it's two things that was changed instrumentally. And again, my personal feeling, this is the process we're actually witnessing right now.
Do you think? Well,
I do believe so, yes.
You mentioned realism, but what pushed 19th century realism out of the way?
These guys over here, right here.
Yes. So
that was one of them. That was the first.
I appreciate you being an optimist about it, but I don't know if photography can handle a Renaissance yet. I don't think that technology would define us as a Renaissance.
You think photography is not ready yet?
I just don't. I don't think humans are ready. It's not digital fault that a person can take. The average photographer can take up to, let's say a photographer takes 200 photographs a week. That's 800 photographs a month. That's what, 12,000 or 11,000 photographs a year.
Sometimes I'm bringing 1,000 from a weekend walk.
Yeah, but
that's an instrumental difference, actually.
Yeah, the human doesn't have to do that. That's greed, or that's not knowing your speed. What I appreciate about painters, and I'm not a painter, what I appreciate about painting is that I hear painters say that no painting is ever complete. And I say this, no painter's career is ever complete until they pass away. See, with photography, we get so greedy with the moment, we don't know how to stop. Like you said, people can over-edit something.
Yes.
Every other medium has a stop, except for photography. You can take 100 photographs a day, and if you feel as though you haven't taken that moment, you can keep going.
No.
I don't know how do we handle that. There's an exchange that we've made on a society level where we say we can take all these photographs and keep looking at all these photographs, where we are putting a desensitized kind of mindset on visual images. That's psychological now. Because I don't understand. I don't know how do we perform this. And now what is a professional photographer today?
Well,
We don't even know. What is an artistic photographer today?
Well, that's exactly why apologies. I do believe that we ready to make actually distinction between art photography and photography because of that very thing and thousands of images that come in from it. I do believe that the specific reason why art photography is in deep need of reformation, and don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about the traditional classical field photography.
Okay.
It will survive, it will be just as it is, and progress in its own way, and maybe stray away in completely different direction from digital photography at some point. I do believe that this also can happen. They will just become to be two completely different medias.
It could be, but that's what I mentioned about the war. I don't like. It would be nice if things could merge together, but I know that it won't because there's the commercial aspect. I wrote an essay that actually stated photography is the new pop art, and when I say pop art, photography is actually a medium. Painting is a medium, music is a medium. Within those brackets, you have entertainment, you have art, you have academic, you have documentation. Photography is the only one that's a pop art. And what I mean by being a pop art is that the commercial aspect of it has pushed photography into being a pop art. The only positive part that I see in the future with photography would be that there's not a lot of people that's writing about photography, there's not a lot of people that's studying photography, there's not a lot of people that's purchasing prints. The future will have that because there's so many images and great photographers that are being overlooked today that later on, 50 years from now, somebody will have to look back. And it will be like them going through the pyramids in Egypt or something and seeing hieroglyphics on the walls of the pyramids. So this is very important. That's the only aspect I see coming out of all of this. I don't see the famous photographer or a photographer with 1 million followers advancing photography. I see that as a personal way. And then I also think that we neglect the educational part of photography in terms of you and I could stand in front of a Picasso and discuss that, but why can't we do that in front of a photograph?
Oh, I've seen that happening.
But the most expensive photographic print that has been sold is from a living photographer. No other medium has that. The provenance value of a Picasso increased because we know that he will never paint again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, like, how do we balance that out? I think that society look at the photograph as being disposable. You can take that, throw it away, take that, throw it away. I don't even see people reading photographs today. In terms outside of photographers, outside of us, but I don't see people like, I think people just scroll down, okay. And if you know how to market yourself, you can easily get a lot of followers. If you say, okay, I'm going to use shock value, I'm going to put a hashtag, you can easily market your photography. That's not the issue. The issue is, what are you doing with your photography? And I don't think that's a film or digital issue. I think that's a photographer's issue. I think that's a society lack of appreciation of the image, of the photograph. We have people telling us what kind of photographs that we should like for our celebrities, and they're not even photographers. Because we follow them on social media sites, and they say, this is a great photograph, so we hit like. We don't question and say, why do you think this is a great photograph?
Well, that's actually an interesting question. What is more important, the formal definition of a great photograph or what catches your eye on the timeline of the Facebook?
Yeah, and what is the artistic part? Because also in the history of photography, we have not had 100 years of art photography in terms of, if we want to say artists. We have had about 70 to 80 years, and that has not been straight. That has not been like a consistent. It has been like, if you go back to Ansel Adams and group what was it, 66 I think, or 64, those groups, that group and Edward Weston, those guys was pushing for straight photography because they wanted to separate it from pictorialism. The early photographers believed in pictorialism to emulate painting. They used to have soft focus and used to put things on the lens to make the photograph look like a painting. Now, Henry Peach Robinson used to get in big debates with the Royal Photographic Society and also Peter Henry Emerson over what was photography and what was art photography. 30 years later, Edward Weston picked this up and he goes with this philosophy. This is where we start going to pre-visualization. Okay, then the commercial aspect of photography came in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. Think about Kodak and all of these great cameras that they were producing and pushing on the candid photographer. All right, then you got 1960s with MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, which was connected to Edward Steichen, who was connected to Alfred Stieglitz, who was connected to Gallery 291. So the art part has always been there, but then it slides off. And now we're right back into digital photography in terms of people putting in apps. To me, that could be just as, the same kind of thinking as someone doing soft focus on purpose. That's a painter. So I still don't think photography has defined itself as an art. That's the only optimistic part I can look at this medium and say, somebody could take the lead, or no, it's not someone, a movement. We have not had no movements in photography. In still photography, there have been no movements.
Oh, I actually have something in making, so maybe
well, you
one
should
day.
push it. Yes, you should definitely push it. I'm not one to say that digital is better or film is better. I think that pick up any camera. If it interests you, pick it up. Pick up the camera. Make a camera. Do something, and just aim. But then, as you do that, grow with it. Become a person that can articulate what you see, or at least articulate what someone else sees.
Artistic growth is the key.
It has to be. That's the only way photography will survive. I think if we speak outside of technology, because we're only on technology, we're not on technique anymore. Film photography teaches you technique. Even if you have bad technique, you still have technique.
Yes, you have to have it in order to produce something.
Yes, it's not a kind of like, okay, artificial intelligence. That's where I think cameras are going today. I think that computers will tell you what moment is a moment, and we will subscribe to it. I'm serious. I don't think that people want to sit there and say, okay, well, this is a great moment. I mean, this is a great photograph. I understand film, and I'm not one to always say every film photograph is art. It's not.
Absolutely.
It's not. No. It's not at all. I mean, especially if we get deep into film photography, I think a lot of color photographs might have a commercial appeal towards it, because if you really zero down into film photography, it's about black and white. If you really want to learn film photography, yes, it's the tones and the light. You can only see that in black and white. That's black. That's where it started with Niepce in France. Is all black and white photography. Color is an advertising imagination. Color will never be able to emulate painting.